The more evidence, the better, I say.
I mean, this is so improbable.
That's a bold statement.
I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I didn't make that argument. He did.
Why is that true? Is that a good question? Maybe it's not.
Drew, you're not supposed to ask good questions like
Sorry,
that.
sorry.
Don't ask difficult questions.
Bill, jump in here.
I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic.
You're listening to The Divide. Well, welcome back to The Divide. I talked with Ethan at the American Atheist Convention. Drew wasn't there, but you'll hear from Drew in the after show. Ethan describes himself as a secular Mormon, which means that he believes he was shaped culturally, philosophically, morally at such a deep level that his core outlook is still Mormon, even though he's agnostic or atheist. There's a similar argument that Tom Holland makes more formally in a book he published called Dominion, Tom Holland, the British historian, who himself is agnostic, but says that basically he's Christian. Basically, we're all Christian, even the atheists, in the West. So this is an interesting idea, interesting to hear how Ethan's views are looked at by the atheist community, and particularly since that community prides itself on being free thinking, as sort of being unshackled from a religious or Christian outlook. I asked him, are atheists truly free thinking? And I think you'll be surprised to hear his response to that. Drew has some interesting insights, as always, in the after show, and what he thinks in his experience versus Ethan's, and I think you'll enjoy that as well. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Well, we're here at the American Atheist Convention. Nice to have you, Ethan.
Thank you for having me.
And you are a secular Mormon.
Secular Mormon, yep.
Okay, so this means what?
It means that I identify as a secular individual. Specifically, I choose to live my life without a belief in God, right? Okay. I'm not one of those militant atheists that profess to absolutely know that there is no God. I don't think there's any reasonable way to say that, right? I just to me I believe that the probability of a God existing is not worth basing my life off of it, right? So I choose not to. So in that sense, I'm secular, but I'm also I prefer the term secular Mormon over ex-Mormon, because ex-Mormon implies that I've left everything about Mormonism behind, when in reality I've resigned my membership from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But I mean, I grew up in Provo, Utah. Like all of my friends growing up were Mormon. I am a product of the Mormon culture, right? And seventh generation Mormon on both sides. Both sides of my family crossed the plains from Nauvoo, Illinois to Salt Lake City. A ton of my ancestors settled small towns all around Nevada and Utah and Arizona.
So culturally, you still feel very much an identity that's shaped by Mormonism, and not one I guess you feel like you need to leave. I mean, like, couldn't someone say to you who's more of a militant ex-Mormon, couldn't they come to you and say, well, there's no basis either for saying you're Mormon still, why?
Yeah, no, I get that all the time. In fact, to be honest with you, my harshest critics are often ex-Mormons that don't like my label of secular Mormon.
Okay.
And it's typically because they do want to leave everything about Mormonism behind. They don't want anything tying them to Mormonism, and that's totally fine. I don't like, you live your life however you want to, and I completely understand that feeling. Like, I went through those same feelings myself, and I'm not saying that I've gotten past it or matured or anything. I'm just saying that I personally would rather hold on to that part of my identity, and to be honest with you, I know so much more about Mormonism and study Mormonism so much more now that I'm not a practicing Mormon than I did when I was a practicing Mormon. And I graduated from Mormon seminary, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but all Mormon high school kids they attend 4 years of seminary. In Utah, you have what's called release time, and you just, for one period of your high school schedule, you go next door to a church building and then take just Sunday school classes, essentially, is what it is, right? We study the Bible and the Book of Mormon and other Mormon scripture. And so anyway, I did 4 years of that. So anyway, and then I went on a Mormon mission, I know the Bible and the Book of Mormon especially the Book of Mormon, very, very well, right? So I studied Mormonism quite a bit, but in terms of like its history, like I know way more about Mormon history than I ever did, especially when it comes to like my ancestors, right? That I am a descendant from, obviously, because it's just so fascinating to me. It's like, how did my family end up in Utah? Like I used to think how blessed I was to be born into the one true church in Utah, right? And now I just think, I'm like, well, what are the chances, right? And those chances fascinate me, and so I love learning about my heritage. I actually just got a tattoo.
Yeah, I can see that. That is a. It's hard to describe that.
Yeah.
Scarfed guy.
It's a pioneer woman.
Oh, it's a woman. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries.
So that's the worst mistake I could have made. I
No
see
worries.
more now. She's a woman. I'm getting a better angle on it. The bee, a honey bee underneath her.
Yeah. So
it's taken up from your shoulder down to your elbow. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with the bee
I wonder if we should maybe
Mormonism.
pass on it just for this because we're so short on time.
Yeah.
I'd love to just.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a tribute to my pioneer heritage.
Yeah,
Is what
okay, I
that tattoo
see.
is, right?
Yeah.
So that it's just yeah.
So you're not alone, I guess. There's a lot of other millennial Mormons in particular that are similar to the Christian churches. A lot of millennials are heading to the exit doors.
Yeah, and the heading to the exit doors. However, the data shows that while they are leaving the church, it's interesting. They're kind of doing Mormonism their own way. Right there, like I grew up in a very Orthodox family that was very black and white. Like you do this, or you're not going to heaven, or like you're gonna have to go talk to your bishop or something like that. Whereas like a lot of millennial Mormons these days are like, oh yeah, coffee once in a while is just fine, right? For those that don't know, Mormons do not drink coffee. If you drink coffee, you can't get into the temple, and if you can't go to the temple, you can't get into heaven, right?
Right.
That was literally the mindset that I grew up in, right? And now a lot more millennial Mormons, they're more lax about that, more lax about tattoos. Tattoos are also a huge no, and also about. Like when I was the Mormons have something called the law of chastity, and when I was a teenager, that was like harped on by my bishop all the time. You do not fool around with sexually or at all, and I think today's Mormons are a little. I mean, it also depends on where you grow up, but I think they're a little more lax about that. For me, it was a little hard because 95% of my high school was Mormon, and so everyone was kind of Brother's Keeper was very much a practiced doctrine in my high school, right? And it wasn't a religious high school at all; it was a public school, right? But it was just everybody was Mormon, so by default, everybody's Brother's Keeper, right? Right. So,
and you still retain, I guess, Mormon morality to some degree, or no?
I mean, no. I would say no. I mean,
okay.
I still don't. I don't go out and kill people. That's what. But like,
I'm glad you mentioned that in the middle of the interview.
I mean, a big part of Mormon morality is your sexual life, that you're abstinent before marriage, and like that's a huge part of Mormon morality, and that you're not with multiple people, right?
Right.
And I have absolutely no problem with any consenting sexual relation, polyamorous or otherwise, right? As long as it's completely consensual, which other active Mormons, especially like my believing family, would hear that and completely cringe. Like if they're listening, they're probably like, "Oh my God," and they probably wouldn't say, "Oh my God," because that's also a big no-no in Mormonism.
So you're just stepping on toes. The tattoo is designed to send a message.
No, not necessarily.
No.
It wasn't.
You just wanted a tattoo.
Not at all.
Okay.
I've always been fascinated with tattoos. It wasn't designed to send a message. I wanted a tribute to my, and it's specifically the tattoo specifically portrays a woman, because Mormon women, as are most women in history, are often forgotten, and Mormon women are some of the most badass women in the country's history. They were actually the first to exercise the right to vote in the history of the United States.
All right. Well, I should have not stopped you earlier. Then
no, you're fine.
The tattoo.
No, totally.
So, as is common in American debate, the answer is either it's black or white. It's yes or no. You're either red or blue. You're either this or that. It's always a polarized set of options, it seems. And no doubt that's also influences the way people think about God. You either believe in God or you don't. And I tend to think that the history of the discussion about God is a lot more broad than that and a lot more nuanced than that. And it doesn't seem to have influenced, surprise, surprise, a lot of the American thinking about God. And when I am talking to people about God, they tend to sort of assume it's either God or no God. Or it's either, excuse me, I should be more specific, it's either Jesus or atheism.
Right.
But you know, I'm a classicist, so I spent a lot of time in university and since then reading the classical philosophers and their discussions about God, which predate Jesus by 400 years plus. And I think not too many people nowadays, not only because of the way our education system works, but just the nature of the cultural discussion. You know, nobody's reading any of these people at all, and they're not in the least bit influenced. But I'm heavily influenced by it, so that when I'm discussing God, I think, well, why would you just become an atheist when you leave Mormonism? I mean, what about Aristotle's arguments, or Gödel, or Leibniz, or people like this? And I'm aware people aren't normally reading them, but I try to suggest them.
Yeah.
So have you had any kind of exposure to contemplating that kind of idea, that maybe you might be a theist, you believe that you're open to theism in some way, but maybe not necessarily to Mormonism, or
and
you just blew right past Christianity and theism and Judaism and everything and just became atheist?
Well, that's a great question, and as you point out, I fall into the majority of Americans in which I am not familiar with the classic works, right? However, that said, I mean, once a lot of people, when they leave the church, in fact, apparently the majority of people, according to data, when they leave the Mormon church, they still believe in some deity, right? I don't know how well defined it is, but they just don't associate with another church. And I think the reason why that is because they a lot of the tactics that the Mormon church employs to keep its membership in check, for lack of a better term, are employed in other religions too, and they don't really like that. When I say I'm an atheist, I'm mostly talking about I don't believe in any of the gods as they have been defined by any religion that I'm familiar with, right?
Of course.
Is there a possibility that I don't believe that there is, that Mormons believe in Heavenly Father up on Kolob, which is the star nearest to heaven, right? That's what they call it. And that he has so many different worlds, right? And that we have the potential to become gods ourselves and also create worlds and our own spirit children and stuff. No, I don't believe in that at all. I don't believe in this. I'm trying to be respectful, but I know a lot of atheists use the term like this guy in the sky, right, looking down on us. No, I don't believe in a God like that at all. Nor do I believe in a conscious being, I guess, that is orchestrating what's going on. Is there a possibility that that there is some higher power that interfered with the creation of our galaxy and whatnot? Yes, that is entirely possible, right? Again, I'm not familiar with the classics arguments at all, but if I were presented with compelling evidence to show that was the case, ethically, I would be required to consider it. You feel
genuinely, I take it, you feel genuinely open to still listen to those sorts of things. Those sorts of, you might someday hear some discussion about the different ideas about God in what's called classical theism, the philosopher's God or whatever, and maybe you'd say, hey, I'm going to listen to that because I haven't heard that before, and you feel like you're open to that.
Yeah, I am familiar with, and I know he's like, I'm a fan of Albert Einstein in his religious views, in the sense that he was, today he would be classified as an atheist. I don't know if he ever called himself that, but whenever he referred to God, he was referring to this potential power, that kind of what I was just explaining, that did potentially orchestrate the universe, but not an actual physical being.
The mathematician's God, or the
Exactly.
Yeah, so Einstein, I guess, I'm like you, I don't pretend to know exactly everything he said. I've read a number of his statements about God, and his conviction was that the universe, we must assume the universe has fundamental order.
Yeah.
Because otherwise there's no point in pursuing physics and things, because you're just going to at some point just drop off a cliff.
Right.
And so he referred to the universe as of God in that sense, that there's a fundamental order. But I'm not really talking about that. Aristotle thought there was an eternal being, not just an eternal being, but the eternal being who explains the existence of the universe at every moment, who wills the universe into its continued existence. Not just explaining how it started, but and he came to that through a philosophical argument, which of course starts with simple premises that are based on widely observed phenomena, like the universe. The start of Aristotle's most famous argument is that change exists. It's literally, his first premise is change exists in the universe, which seems like there's nobody that really denies that, but there actually were philosophers in his day that denied the existence of change.
Interesting. And
so he started on the first premise is change exists, and which is what we describe as contingency, whatever. And we're not going to go into that. Just to say, how most people are just totally clueless about this, and as you say, you're not really that familiar with it. So, do you take the view that are you a materialist? You know what I mean? Like, are you a strict materialist? Like, the only thing that exists is the material universe, and there's anything that's immaterial I treat as non-existence because there's not empirical evidence. So like science investigates nature and the material world, and things that are immaterial, like mathematics or the laws of nature are not materially observable or demonstrable, empirically demonstrable in that sense. So, or do you not, or does that all just sort of feel like it quickly goes beyond what you would know, what you think about it?
I do think it goes a little bit beyond my knowledge that I have. However, I will say this: I'm a fan of Emerson and Thoreau, and their philosophy that there's kind of a spirit, for lack of a better word, or some force connecting every living thing.
Yeah.
I like that because I think it speaks to humanism quite a bit, right? And that's kind of the...
And would that be a real existing spirit of some just immaterial, but it really exists, or are we just talking about sort of the zeitgeist or whatever, or something like that?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm definitely not like... I'm not like a superstitious person in that like I believe in like this great, like I don't believe in a spirit leaving our bodies, right? Like or anything like that. But I do, like, whether it's a force or a spirit or whatever, that I do think that it is possible, and I'm completely open to the idea that there is something that could maybe in the future with technology advances be proven to exist that does connect.
Okay.
I mean, so I'm completely open to that.
In that
idea.
case, by the way, it would still in the end just be it'd be something like dark matter or gravity or energy, in the sense that it's just another part of the material universe, the way you're defining it.
Yeah. Yep.
And maybe I could ask you about something that I'd be interested in your take on, although it's a kind of a different direction. But I should say this before I go on to it, that the reason I ask about immaterial things is because I see immaterial reality as being a necessary part of understanding the universe. Like, I don't think of as mathematics as just in our head, but that mathematics are a real objective feature of the universe, and they're not material. Like a basketball is spherical, and it has mathematical proportions, not just in our head, but it really does objectively in reality. And it's not, you can blow up the rubber basketball, if you want to, like on can't think of the show where they were always blowing things up. When in doubt, C4. Anyway, those two guys, I can't think of them.
Mythbusters?
Mythbusters, yeah,
Okay.
thank you. But even if they blow it smithereens, it's like the mathematics of a sphere are still existing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think of them as they're real. Like it's a real part of the basketball, even though it's not the material part. And so I'm very, like, I've come to a real strong sense of, like, that's the way you have to view the universe, and it's actually hugely problematic if you try to deny immaterial reality. But that's the only reason I brought it up.
Well, no, and I would completely agree with you there. I mean, I think materialism is a little bit beyond my area of expertise, to say the least. But no, I mean, what you just said about a basketball, like, 100% agree with you.
Yeah. So that's the reason I asked, because I tend to think a lot of people don't realize how much they assume that there are immaterial realities that are part of our universe but not material, and that they're viewing things like that all the time. And then when I try to bring it up, I think sometimes people they want to say, no, there's nothing like that, because they think I'm immediately going to say, well, then therefore you must believe that God exists, which I don't think you have to.
Right.
But anyway, so let me go on to this next thing, which hopefully will interest people a little more, which is your view on separation of church and state.
Yeah.
I'm curious from a Mormon perspective how you'd view that now, let's just say.
Yeah, I mean, I support it wholeheartedly, right?
And did you, growing up, was that important to the Mormon community?
I don't think I understood it the way I understand it now growing up.
So let me ask you,
growing up, I grew I viewed the separation of church and state as a means to protect my religion.
Right,
rather than the other way around.
Okay.
Right? And maybe protect the state from religion is an offensive way to put it, and that's not what I mean, right? But that the influence of religion, I now think that the influence of religion not being in government is much more important than the other way around. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, the way, so the free exercise clause is clearly meant to protect the individuals, so that they can practice their religion without the
and that's
the establishment clause is the other side of it, is not having, but they're related, because if the state establishes a particular religion, then that would mean an individual doesn't have then the free exercise of their own religion. So that's why they're related.
So here's one quick example that I get a lot of flack on from specifically ex-J-Dubs. I am extremely concerned about what is happening with the Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia right now. They are being imprisoned, right? And while I do not support the Jehovah's Witnesses as an organization, I support their right to practice their religion freely. And what Russia is doing to them now is extremely concerning in my mind.
Okay.
So I do support. Anytime a government steps in and says you can't practice your religion this way, if a government needs to step in and say what you're doing here in your religion is having negative effects on society and is illegal, then yes, I 100% support that. But just all out denying the practices of a certain religion, that's incredibly concerning.
So the cake baker in Colorado, was your instinct, from what you knew of it, to be? Would you defend him as well, or no?
That's a good question. I tend to, and I'm probably going to get a lot of shit for this, but I tend to think that unless he was a government cake baker, no, he should not be obligated to, right? To have made the cake.
All right.
I think that one got a little blown out of proportion
now,
a little bit.
When you say you're going to take a lot of flack for it, I'll try to avoid having to tell iTunes that this is an explicit product.
Oh, I apologize.
I don't care.
Feel free to bleep that out if you want.
So, when you say that, I assume, who are the people you're afraid of that are going to say that to you? Because it sounds as though you feel like you can't be intellectually honest about that there's a social pressure to not take that position.
Yeah, well, no, among a lot of militant atheists and liberals, I mean, they, which I associate with a lot of people like that, right? And I'm fine disagreeing with them,
right?
That doesn't mean that.
Is it supposed to be that this is supposed to be here at this convention the epicenter of free thought?
Yeah.
This is like a boast I see everywhere. Is that this is the place you can finally go to have free thought.
And see, I don't think that's the case.
Okay.
I'll be 100% honest. I don't think that's the case.
Okay. Well, I think that's very insightful.
I to be honest, like I feel just at most atheist or ex-religious events, or meetups or whatever, which I attend a lot of them, especially when I first left the church, I feel maybe not just as restrained, but significantly restrained to express my actual like opinions as I did in church.
Okay.
Right. However, there are certain people that I've since gotten to know much better that I could feel that I could open up to, and like I immediately feel that with you, because I see that you are very open to that, and you're not the kind that are gonna nail me down if you disagree with me, right?
No, I'm not interested in that.
And publicly, I'm not afraid to publicly express my opinions at all, and I'm used to getting a lot of flack because
you just know it's coming.
Yeah. So that's why I said that.
One of the true free thinkers, you know.
Yeah. Well, and that said too, that doesn't mean that I don't think that what the baker did was wrong, right? Like,
sure, I totally understand.
I just don't think that the government should, like I said, unless he was a government employee providing a government service.
Yeah.
No, I don't.
I think Christians are divided on this too. There was an incident in Birmingham, Alabama, actually, just a couple weeks ago, of a venue that said no to I think they were two lesbians that were going to get married, and then they took a lot of flack on social media. They said in their initial communication their religious beliefs prohibited them from doing this, but then within a week they changed their minds and they decided they would host it, but they insisted they're still actually opposed on religious grounds to the idea. So I think there's probably in the Christian world too, there's diversity on that kind of issue, on the cake baker even probably to some extent as well, maybe not as much, but to some. But the reason I asked about separation of church and state is because to me, one of the things that's not discussed a lot, it's hardly discussed about the separation of church and state, is that Jefferson himself wrote both the Declaration of Independence and the letter to the Dansbury Baptists, in which is included this statement about the wall of separation of church and state. And I don't think many people have tried to reconcile the two. So when they talk about separation of church and state, there's not much discussion. It's sort of assumed we know what that must mean. But actually there's been a tension from the moment America was founded between the way Jefferson viewed it, the way Adams and Washington viewed it, and here's the basic tension. Jefferson thought that the government of the United States, or rather the country, the nation, was created in order to protect the individual rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, which that government didn't invent, but rather they're endowed by the Creator.
Right.
They're rights that come from God, and the government didn't create those rights. It can't, therefore, deny those rights or suppress or banish those rights. At the same time, Jefferson wrote that there needs to be a wall of separation between church and state. That one particular church, which was the context, the Congregationalists and so on in Connecticut, could not deprive the Baptists locally through the state, use their power in the government to impose their religious beliefs and deprive another religion of their free exercise and so on. So those are both statements from Jefferson. I don't myself think it's very sensible to think Jefferson completely changed his mind about how he understood the government of America versus Jefferson went to church services in the Capitol.
Right.
So my take on separation of church and state is that there's actually nothing in the Constitution or the Declaration that prohibits the government from acknowledging the existence of God openly and publicly.
Okay.
But at the same time, the government is not to establish any particular religion as being or denying anyone the free exercise, even by the way of non-religion. So what's your sort of response to that?
Yeah, no, I think I would agree to that. I mean, I would add to it, or impose, like, I don't have a problem with
In God We Trust on the coin? Or something?
I do have a problem with In God We
Okay,
Trust on the coin.
because that would be an example where I'd say there's nothing wrong with the government acknowledging the reality of God.
Well, and here's why I have a problem with In God We Trust on the coin. To me, personally, it's different from Obama or Trump or whoever getting up and praising God in a speech, right? Because, and don't get me wrong, I don't feel oppressed for having to use the currency in any sort of way, right? But like, because I have to use the coin and I myself don't believe in God, right? Excuse me, I do think that is crossing a line. Another good example would be what's happening in Mississippi right now. Their only free license plate option has In God We Trust on it, and secular activists are saying that there needs to be another free option that doesn't say God on it, and I think that's completely fair, right? Yeah. Because I don't want to promote the Christian belief of God myself, not because I don't believe in it, right? So that's
so how do you, like, when you look, like, you live in America, and the Declaration of Independence clearly acknowledges the reality of God the Creator as the basis of the rights, so how do you then think, do you just think, well, I have a totally different concept of, it's not like you deny that historically, but it seems like I would be able to say pretty easily, look, you live in America. I mean, I understand you're not religious. It's not like I think the government, I mean, Jefferson, for example, opposed a national fast that was called by the previous presidents.
Right.
He thought that was just one step too far to promoting religion, okay?
Right.
But he clearly didn't have any problem with acknowledging God in lots of ways. So, and In God We Trust, of course, was not back then anyway on the currency. But I mean, I feel like I could easily say, I mean, given America's history, there's nothing inconsistent with acknowledging God or Declaration of Independence,
Well, I think there's and I'm not a historian by any means, although I am fascinated by history. I do think there's value, and you've cited a lot of historical context here. I think there's value in one, looking at Jefferson's belief in God, which was very different compared
Deist.
Compared to his contemporaries. I mean, I love the Jeffersonian Bible, right? Where he took out all the miraculous, right? In fact, I have a friend who's working on a what he's calling a Jeffersonian Book of Mormon, and he's taken out all the miraculous of the Book of Mormon, and I'm excied to read it when he publishes it, to see exactly what he took out and whatnot.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Anyway, and I mean, there are a lot of people, and I know Dawkins implies this in his book, if not outright says it, that if Jefferson were alive today, he would be an atheist, right? Yeah. And I'm not sure that we have enough, and again, I'm not a historian, I haven't seen enough historical context myself to 100% believe that. However, I think it's very possible. Also, in the God We Trust in our currency, I think it's important to look at when it was added, because as you said, that was not always the case. Yeah. It was added, I believe, in the 50s sometime, about the same time that we started saying the Pledge of Allegiance regularly.
Correct.
And I actually do not say the Pledge of Allegiance. I refuse to, because I don't believe in pledging allegiance to an inanimate object.
There's a lot of Christians that don't think they should do that either. Right. Not the majority by any means. But
well, and I started doing that while I was Mormon, actually, and it didn't have anything to do with my religious beliefs by any means. It was just well,
let me just say, so we can kind of close it up. Because we could very easily go on for a long time. And I've really enjoyed getting to know you here, by the way, at the convention. It's been great. We've, of course, talked a lot beyond this, but I'd like to suggest charitably that Dawkins does not understand either the history about Jefferson or the philosophical concepts of God when he talks about them sometimes. So,
and that doesn't surprise me. I'll be I use Dawkins as an example because I know a lot of other atheists take that and run with it, right? So anyway,
I appreciate your sentiment for sure. Hey, it's been great having you. Thank you very much, and please be sure to listen to the after show, where I really look forward to hearing what Drew thinks about our conversation. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, welcome back to The Divide, which you've been listening to Bill's conversation with Ethan, which and now I'm here, Drew, and Bill and I are going to discuss some more. I thought, Bill, that Ethan was very much the of the same mind as me about a lot of things. So I thought he was very eloquent, and but no,
Smart.
but I definitely I got the feeling that he was just sort of leading, like letting the chips fall where they may, sort of trying to figure out each issue, including his own beliefs as they come. In other words, he wasn't trying to throw religion out. He wasn't trying to embrace a particular type of atheism. He was just saying, there's this thing that I used to believe, namely in Heavenly Father, since he was a Mormon before, that I don't necessarily think is plausible anymore. I've kind of steered away from that in my just the way I see the world, but not necessarily towards a completely different worldview. It seemed to me. I mean, there were certainly some things that would not agree with traditional religion, whether it be Mormon or Christian or whatever. But I was wondering if you saw it the same way. And then also, the issues that we talk about a lot came up, like Aristotle's, Aristotle's God, which he had no problem with. I think, whether or not he, and you've asked me this too, would say our worldview is materialism, and we both kind of say no, not really. I mean, we agree with you that there are, immaterial realities, from math to morality. Like there are things out there that are not just matter. And then the cake baker came up, and so all these things. And so I guess I was going to kind of spot all that up to you with, why do you think these things come up? And you've kind of pushed me on this same issue. Not that you were pushing Ethan, but you were just asking him about all of these worldview items. Is there a sort of a thread that runs through that maybe we could just take it from here? Because I'm not really sure there's anything I have to highlight that I disagree with him about.
Yeah, I thought, it did remind me of talking to you, by the way, talking to Ethan, and I'd gotten along so well with him at the convention. We had talked a lot before that interview, and he struck me as very commonsensical. And as I pushed him with a lot of questions, just seeing what his reaction was to these different things, I thought, he was honest that he hadn't really gone and read Jefferson's original letter on the wall of separation and stuff, but he was giving just kind of an honest, this is what strikes me right now response. And I really liked that. And I do kind of have an idea of why I think these things keep coming up. And it's because, first of all, I'm the one that asked all those questions, because I think they become very defining, where if someone sort of rejects any immaterial reality, then it's sort of, okay, well, now I have something to talk about. If they're more like you and me, then it's kind of like, okay, that strikes me as very commonsensical. Let's move on to the next thing. And so that's sort of the way I feel about that.
So did you kind of feel that way with Ethan, that there's not really anything, maybe you were struggling to find a divide even?
No, well, no, because I'm a Christian and have a very definitive worldview. So I didn't think that would be hard.
But he was pretty much agreeing with all the, I think the way that you see these things that kept coming up, the Aristotle's God, he said, I have no problem with that. If somebody could, if he could see evidence of it, which he is open to someone showing him, that he would sort of agree with you on that. He just hasn't seen the evidence.
Yeah, he struck me as very Jeffersonian. He even specifically cited sort of his admiration for Jefferson. And I think, obviously I would get along fine, I think, with a Thomas Jefferson in most conversation, because Thomas Jefferson said he believed in God, even though his idea of God was not quite the full Christian clarity about God or of Jesus being God in the flesh.
Maybe that's an interesting point. Just, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent. If you did have an idea of somewhere we could go with this, but just for my benefit, I'm pretty sure you would disagree with Jefferson's Bible, right? He took out all the miracles or whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's an interesting thing to me. Because I can sort of see Ethan's side of it and Jefferson's side of it, and miracles don't seem very plausible from a scientific perspective. but then again, I can totally see the other side. It's like, well, why not? If you're talking about the creator of the universe, then a miracle doesn't seem like a tall ask. So is it as simple as that, or is there anything else interesting to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I see it is that there's a certain sort of basic level of, if you're going to try and make sense of the world that we live in every day, the world in which we tie our shoes, I think it gets very, I think the cash out on no God is way too high of a price to pay at a rational moral level. So that's a very basic worldview kind of thing. So anyone who's willing to say, yeah, I think there's sort of some overarching, or if you want to call it tectonic, immaterial reality that is sort of required to explain all this. And now we can have a spectrum of, is this sort of the deist God, the Aristotle God, or how exactly do we want to see that? Is it, to me, a very perfectly rational conversation. And so I don't think that means we agree per se altogether, but it means I feel a lot more comfortable in that conversation than I do. It feels a little too sort of denier, how they say, like climate denier or whatever. It feels a little too denier to me to sort of take the hard atheist position. But at the same time, I found myself just respecting
I think
where
that's an
he's coming
interesting
from. Yep. Even though I don't think he quite, like, I don't think he said he believed in Aristotle's God, so to speak, but I do think.
In fact, he said he didn't because he didn't feel like he had seen Aristotle's case for that God, at least not to his satisfaction. But he did agree with you that there were non-material realities, and that's an interesting point to me, because then he was also attracted to Jefferson's no miracle Bible, and I would like to ask him about that, if we had him here, which unfortunately we don't. I mean, that, to me, Jefferson's Bible doesn't appeal to me that much at all, because I feel like part of, it's kind of an all or nothing thing with me. It's like, either this is, what it purports to be, or it's, maybe there are some good teachings in there, but it's no different than any other, book of wisdom.
Plato's writings or something.
Exactly. Or going back to Aristotle, or any philosopher, or Immanuel Kant, just what there's something special about it, or there's not. It's almost binary to me. So I just would like to ask him about that and run that down. But anything else jump out at you as far as?
What I was going to say something about his reference to Dawkins. He made a comment about some things Dawkins had said, which I sort of pushed back on and thought, I thought these were pretty sort of silly things that Dawkins has said. Not that everything Dawkins has said is silly, but I thought it represented a problem you and I find, and I think you and I have been guilty of. I don't know if I can think of anything at this moment, but I'm sure we have at some point. I think you would agree with this, which is that we often are very tolerant of what is said out of our side of these discussions, and we tend to want to believe our side in the same way that sort of partisans want to believe that, their senators are telling the truth.
Yeah.
Their journalists are telling the truth. The other side does propaganda.
I have to interrupt just to credit Ethan for his honesty, because when you push back on, I think he was saying that Dawkins thought Jefferson would be an atheist in this current day, and you were like, I don't know about that. And he's like, well, to be fair, I don't know that Dawkins was right about that, and I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't. So
he was totally, but again, that's just something like you would say. Yeah, that's just something like you would say to me. Yeah, I love that.
But I would look at it the exact same way. It's like, well, that's an interesting point in, for one side, if true. I mean, then again, I'm not really particularly worried about Jefferson.
It is interesting, but my point was that he wasn't self-critically pushing back on it. He was inclined to accept Dawkins' statement to the point where he sort of offered it back to me as a sort of resolution to a conflict I presented, which is, I said, look, Jefferson believed in God, and he also wrote the Wall of Separation, and that those things are in tension. And this was sort of one way he was in his own mind trying to solve it. By the way, totally transparently, I don't blame him. But his resolution was to cite something Dawkins had said, which was just an assertion that Jefferson would be an atheist today. And he was inclined to be warmer to the idea. Why? Well, because of course that that's his side. And I don't think he's doing anything any different from things that Christians do as well as atheists. Like, I don't think either side is free of guilt on this problem. It's very, very hard to look in the mirror of our own ideas and our side's ideas and really look at them objectively. So I wasn't trying to pick on him. I thought his reaction was great once as we were discussing it. The other thing that stood out to me was the thing he said about free thinkers. That just really floored me. That he said basically he feared sharing his own true opinion.
Yeah.
We were at the atheist convention, and I mean, the probably the most common phrase you see on placards, buttons and bumper stickers around that convention is not the word atheism. It's the word free thinker, free thought. This is the place you can go. And you and I both know why that is, because, if you grew up in a religious setting, you feel like you're only allowed to think certain things, and you can't freely think because you're pushing on the tectonic plates that hold up your faith. And so you don't go there, so to speak. And now suddenly you're at a place where you can go there. But he found out after being there a while, actually, he said, I mean, he didn't just say it was a struggle to have some free thought. I mean, he was still said what he thought, right? In the interview, he still felt like he was saying what he really thought. But he said it actually wasn't a lot different from the church he had grown up in.
Right.
And I thought that really struck me.
Yeah, I think, I took that as that's just sort of our nature as humans, right? To any kind of group, you kind of feel pressure to not rock the boat too much, right? And so it's funny how, it kind of almost, more than any of your other interviews from these conferences, I wondered why Ethan was there. He just didn't seem like the type of, like, because I mean, I've never gone to a conference like that except with you. That's not something I'm seeking out, and yet I feel like a pretty thoughtful person, and we have this podcast and we have these conversations all the time, and yet I just don't seek out a conference like that. And so I thought it was interesting that he would, but you said he was actually had some kind of booth that he was.
Yeah, he runs a thing called Faith Leaks, or it used to be called Faith Leaks.
Gotcha.
I think I haven't checked it recently, but where they sort of leak out, it's kind of like Julian Assange's
WikiLeaks, right?
WikiLeaks, but it's like for religion, particularly the Mormon religion, but now it was Baptists and Catholics and anyone who was willing to send. Yeah, well, anyone who's willing to send them like private emails that expose a priest or something like that,
wow.
They publish it. So he's not just on.
He's very into. He just that makes it even more impressive to me, because he's a dissenter from some of the consensus, which I think is healthy.
Yeah, but I thought that him just saying, for me, for him saying boast, obviously the conference is a place where there's sort of boasting about free thought. I don't think I'm stretching that. There's just open boasting that this is a place you can think freely. And I thought him sort of denying that that's really the whole truth, it struck me as, that sounds like the same kind of thing churches are guilty of, where there's a boasting of your tribe and its virtues, but really when it gets down to it, the reality isn't quite so utopian, and it's laced with hypocrisy, and I think that's the truth, and that's what he said, because it is the truth.
That's great. And kindred spirit, really. He can.
Yeah, I thought I really liked that.
I knew
you would like that. Yeah, I knew you would like that too. So
that's great.
Well, great follow-up conversation. I think I really enjoyed Ethan. I hope I get to see him at a future convention. And always great to talk to you after and to hear your reaction. So thanks. I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic. Thanks for listening.
The Divide is produced by Alan and Ben Hawbrooks and edited by John Workman. Dalton Reed handles IT. Join us for further discussion on this topic at our subreddit, TheDividebyiPUB. To learn more about other episodes and who we are, check out ipub.org/thedivide. See you next time on The Divide.